My name is Louis Bronstein, Louis Bronstein. I'm a special agent with FBI Miami.
All right, and is that how you were employed back on April 20th of 2016?
Yes,
And did you participate in a surveillance operation at a restaurant by the name of Dolce Vita?
I did.
Where is that location?
18288 Collins Avenue, Sunny Isles, just north of Miami Beach.
All right, and what was the objective of that operation?
That was to surveil a meeting between Charlie Adelson and Katie Magbanua.
Do you know the date? Well, we talked about 4/20/16. Do you know the time of this meeting?
It's approximately 3:45 to roughly 4:45.
Okay, and what efforts were made to record the meeting?
Prior to entering the restaurant, I was handed a audio-video recording device by another agent. Entered the restaurant, took up a seat near Charlie and Katie, and set up the device that was in a sort of a messenger bag in such a way they would be able to record the audio and video.
All right, and have you had an opportunity to review State's Exhibit 154, a disc of that meeting?
Yes.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of the recording that was made inside the restaurant that day?
Yes.
All right, and the quality of the recording is very poor. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
Okay, and is that's not something that, let me ask, were you able to overhear the conversation that was occurring between Mr. Adelson and Ms. Magbanua in the restaurant?
There was a lot of background noise in the restaurant. The one fragment of a sentence that I could clearly hear, I authored it's called an FBI 302 form regarding that.
Okay, and what was that fragment?
That, if I remember correctly, it was a sentence to the effect of, and then he turned and said Mrs. Adelson, and then Mrs. Adelson, and she turned. And that was regarding an event that had happened earlier that day.
Okay.
This was,
who was making the statement?
This was Charlie Adelson making that statement to Katie.
And he was saying something about somebody turning?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able to visually observe the meeting that was attempted to be captured on State's 154?
Yes.
All right. And who were the people that were involved in the meeting?
Charlie Adelson and Katie.
No new objection, Your Honor.
My ruling will be the same. 154 will be admitted. The understanding that their significant part of this is not understandable.
Yes, sir. My request is to publish just a portion so the jury can get an idea of what the video is like. Yes, please. Agent Bronstein, is that Charlie Adelson that we're able to see in the camera view?
Yes.
And the legs of the woman seated across from him, is that Ms. Magbanua?
Yes.
All right, let's play a few more moments. Is the quality from the portion we published pretty consistent with the quality throughout this meeting?
Yes.
No further questions.
Cross.
Good afternoon.
Your involvement in this investigation was limited to this portion of it?
Just this?
Yes.
No.
Were you part of the team that made investigative decisions with regards to what to do after the bump?
Decisions, no. Action, yes. At that time, I was a very junior special agent.
But still special.
Still special.
So Okay, so you were in essence following instructions, correct?
Yes,
At no point were you instructed to see if Ms. Magbanua and my client, Mr. Garcia, were to meet at a restaurant to attempt to record their conversations, correct?
to be clear, you're asking if I was instructed to watch Ms. Magbanua and Mr. Garcia?
Correct.
Not that I can recall.
Because what you were asked to do in this part of the investigation was you guys knew where they were going, correct?
I was informed where Charlie had recently been spotted. I don't know that I knew where he was going.
Well, there was an active wire intercept, correct?
As my knowledge that there was, but I had no involvement with it.
Okay. So you don't know how you got information, but you were instructed to go someplace and Mr. Adelson and Ms. Magbanua showed up, correct?
Yes,
Okay. So my question is, were you instructed to go any place to look to see if Ms. Magbanua and Mr. Garcia would show up together?
not that I can recall.
And these would be instructions that you would have gotten from either a prosecutor or a higher ranking federal agent, correct?
I would have come from another FBI agent.
And how long is this video?
Shy of an hour, I would say.
And the recording device that you had, was it like a little camera or what was it?
I think it could best be described as a messenger bag with the device itself is roughly the size of a laptop, and it has numerous holes for microphones on one side of it and a small camera lens, and I believe just one button, an on-off button. And the idea is you hold it as if it's a messenger bag with a laptop in it, and whatever way it's facing is whatever audio and video it's going to capture.
Does the FBI have other technology that has more compact types of surveillance?
Certainly,
Like button cams? You know what that is, right?
yes.
And you'll agree with me that a button camera, is it a camera that's strategically placed in like a little button like this, correct?
I'm familiar that that exists, but I've never used one.
Okay, but you're familiar that they exist, correct?
I mean, at least in movies and TV. I've never actually used one.
Okay. Well, my question is this. You're aware that they have them in the FBI, right?
They might.
Okay. So the only type of surveillance that you know about is the one that you used here?
Technical surveillance?
Yes, sir.
In terms of audio-video device moved into a
Right.
like I did?
So you said that what you had was about the size of a laptop, correct?
Yes.
Like this.
Yeah,
This is a laptop, right?
correct, about that size.
And so the FBI used a surveillance recording device roughly this size to capture this video, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Like that.
Yes, Your Honor. Special Agent, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Well, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. You wrote a report,
Yes.
and in that report, you put what somebody said, right?
Yes.
That's part of your training.
Yes.
Whether there's a recording or not, to do a report to memorialize it, right?
Correct.
That's important for many different reasons. Some of them would be for you to be able to testify later on in time, accurately, correct?
Yes.
And also for the defense and the prosecution to know what happened during the course of an investigation.
That's correct.
And it's policy to do that. That's the FBI's policy to do that.
Yes.
You testified that you couldn't hear things, but you could obviously see them, right?
Yes.
You can't say, do you know anything about what's been called the bump in this case?
I'm familiar with the bump.
That a piece of paper was given to Don Adelson?
I vaguely remember a piece of paper, but I don't know what might have been on it.
I'm putting on the overhead what's been entered in as government's 120. Zoom out for you. You can't say that you saw Charles Adelson show Catherine Magbanua a piece of paper that had printing consistent with that on it, can you?
No.
One brief second, Your Honor.
You mind?
Nothing further.
Redirect.
Yes, sir.
All right, did you ever have a question? I won't forget this time. Last time it was just so long I've forgotten to ask for questions. Anybody have a question? All right, you can step down. We need to keep this witness in further.
Yes, sir.
Anybody need him for any reason?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you're excused. Call your next witness.
State recalls Craig Isom.
All right, have a seat, please, sir. State your name again for the record, please.
Craig Isom.
You may proceed.
All right, Investigator Isom, do
And you remain under oath, Mr. Isom.
Yes, sir.
you recall going to the crime scene in this
Yes.
case? And are you familiar with the area around the crime scene, meaning the ingresses and egresses off of Trescott?
Yes.
All right, and are you familiar with where the crime scene tape was located in this case?
There was, I know there was crime scene tape north of the residence. I think I saw it at one point, probably 3 or 4 houses north of
Alright.
2116.
And my question is, could one have seen the crime scene tape if one was passing by on Centerville Road looking down Trescott?
No.
All right. Did you conduct an interview of Wendy Adelson on July 18th, 2014?
Yes.
And during that interview, did she indicate that she drove up Trescott and approached the crime scene tape while it was up during this investigation?
Yes.
Were you present for the arrest of Catherine Magbanua?
Yes.
And that was on October 1st of 16?
October 1st, 2016.
All right. And you traveled down to Miami for this arrest?
Broward County, yes.
Okay. And Agent Sanford was there?
Yes.
Was there anything about the show of force for this particular arrest that was unusual or different from other homicide arrests?
No.
At the time of Ms. Magbanua's arrest, did you receive a phone call?
Yes.
From whom did you receive a phone call?
Charlie Adelson's attorney, identified as David Marcus.
And did Mr. Marcus indicate that he knew Ms. Magbanua was being arrested?
I'm going to object to hearsay.
Let's go to the sidebar, please.
No further questions.
Garcia.
Just 1 second, Judge. Nothing from Mr. Garcia, Judge.
Magbanua.
Investigator Isom.
Yes.
You were asked questions about the arrest of Catherine Magbanua. You remember that, right?
I was just asked, I believe it was one question.
Just operating fairly here.
I'm going to strike that comment.
Certainly. Jury disregard the comment. Ask a question, please, Mr. DeCoste.
You were informed prior to her arrest that she would voluntarily surrender if need be, right?
No.
Let's talk about your meeting with Luis Rivera on September 30th of 2016. You wrote a report.
Object to outside the scope.
Sustained.
All right, Judge. Thank you.
Redirect.
No, sir.
All right. Can jury have a question of this witness on this topic? All right. Go sidebar. You can step down, investigator. There was
Will it be recalled today?
What's that?
Will it be recalled today?
You'll have to ask the attorney. There was a question about whether Mr. Martell was wearing a seatbelt. Investigator Isom wasn't on the scene until he'd been removed from the car, so he would not be a proper witness to ask that question of. There was also a question asked about disregarding certain questions or answers. I know that can get a little confusing sometimes. If a question is asked and answered, and there is a basis for me to what we call strike it, I will tell you so, and I will tell you to disregard it. Other than that, you're to consider whatever questions and answers are given. Now, we've had a lot of cases where a question is asked, and then there's an objection, and there's no answer. Questions are not evidence. Questions are something that the attorney has asked. It is not something that you should consider as evidence. And as I told you in the opening comments, my opening instructions, you're not to speculate what a witness might have said had the witness answered that question. Either the question's been withdrawn, you've had some instances where the question's withdrawn, or I've sustained an objection to it. That means there's a legal bar to answering that question, so you're not to speculate on what the answer might have been. So those are three situations that have come up. Hopefully that answers your question. All right? Call your next witness.
State recalls Mary Hull.
Come on up here, please, ma'am. State your name again for the record, please.
Mary Hull, Hull.
You remain under oath, Ms. Hull.
Yes, sir.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Ms. Hull.
Good afternoon.
I want to take you back to the last time that you were testifying in this case. When you were going through the types of bank records and documentation that you relied upon to do your financial analysis, you had relied upon some income tax filings. Is that right?
I did.
Okay. And did you rely on Catherine McBanois' 2013, 2014, and 2015 income tax filings?
I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
First I'm showing you States Exhibit 190. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is it?
Ms. McBanua's 1040 for 2013.
And a 1040
It's a
is,
tax filing.
okay. And is this an accurate copy of the 2013 tax filing for Ms. McBanois?
Yes.
What exhibit number was that?
190.
Okay.
The state moves into evidence Exhibit 190.
Is there objection?
Heard from Mr. Garcia.
No new objection.
I wasn't aware there was an objection at all to this particular document. What is your legal objection to this doc? I understood your objection to the other two documents, but not to this one.
Same objection as to that, Your Honor.
I'll allow States Exhibit 190.
Next I'm showing you States Exhibit 186.
Okay.
I know I'm going out of order. Do you recognize that document?
I do.
What is that, 186?
It's Catherine McBanua's 1040 for 2014.
And is that an accurate reflection of her income tax filing?
Yes.
I'd offer into evidence States 186, Your Honor.
Any additional objection to that?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
Finally, I'm showing you States Exhibit 188. Do you recognize that document?
I do.
What is that?
It's Ms. McBanua's 2015 1040 tax filing.
And is it also accurate?
Yes.
Copy. All right, the state offers into evidence States Exhibit 188 at this time.
Any additional objection? To be admitted.
No, Your Honor.
May I publish, Judge?
You may.
Starting with 2013,
Your Honor, there's minor social security information on those documents. I'd ask for the government to, at least before they publish to the jury, to black those out. If you see them on the first.
We're not gonna do it, but this will be a sealed document, Madam Clerk. And we'll redact that before it's made public.
And can we do that for all three?
Right.
On the 2013 tax document, what employment or wages were reported for 2013 by Ms. McDaniel?
12,297.
No, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't ask that right. Where did she report being employed?
Oh, Sophie Dental.
In 2014 tax filing, and for the record, this is State Exhibit 186. Where did she report being employed?
Sophie Dental.
And is there another one on?
Can you
Oh, yeah.
say that a little more clearly? You're kind of looking down and talking. Would you say that a little more clearly, please?
Sophie Dental.
Okay. And then what other employers?
Adelson Institute.
That's the company.
Finally, for 2015, where did Ms. McDaniel report being employed?
Dr. Obed.
And was there a second one as well?
There was for Adelson Institute.
Now, for the Adelson Institute, would that company or as a business receive any financial benefit to reporting to the IRS that Catherine McBanwell was in fact an employee they were paying funds to?
Yes.
Can you explain that for me?
It would have reduced their taxable income by paying out her salary.
So if they list something as a paid salary, they can deduct that from their total income and then they would only be taxed on the remaining amount?
Yes.
In order for Catherine McBanwell to in turn claim the Adelson Institute on her tax filings, or those wages on her tax filings, would Adelson Institute be required to report her as an employee?
Yes, if she was going to claim the taxes back, yes.
Was there any indication on these three tax filings, 2013, 2014, and 2015, that Catherine McBanwell claimed any employment at a bar, restaurant, club, anything of that nature?
No.
Any reported tips as wages?
I take that back. There was a business that had no name. It was a clerical job in 2013 for $773.
That's 2013?
Yes, ma'am.
For the year 2013, we'll strike that, sorry. May I approach, Your Honor? I'm showing you State's Exhibit 187 for identification. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What is that?
It's a summary of her tax filings that we had, just a simplified summary.
And those are for 2013, 14, and 15?
It is.
Did you have any other tax returns?
No, I did not.
Did you have any what?
Other tax returns? You answered no?
No, we did not.
And is this an accurate summary of the three income tax filings we just discussed?
Yes.
I'd offer into evidence State's Exhibit 187.
I'm not going to accept it in evidence. I assume there's objection. I will allow it to be displayed as a demonstrative aid.
Yes, sir. Same, now I'm showing you State's Exhibit 189. Yes. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what does that document contain?
It's a summary where I added the cash deposits as well to show what would have been a more accurate reflection of her income.
Same for State's Exhibit 189, correct, Judge?
Yes.
First, I'm going to put up here as a demonstrative State's Exhibit 187. And if you have a laser pointer up there, if you wouldn't mind using it. Can you describe the information you've reflected on State's 187 demonstrative?
These are the two, there was a W-2 form, and that shows the $12,290. And then there was some other category for a clerical position she had that showed the $773. When you total those up, that shows up on her line 22 for her total income for that year.
So if someone were to go look at the tax filing for 2013 and go exactly to line 22, they would see the total combined wages reported by Ms. McBanwell for that particular year on the tax filing?
Yes.
Okay. Same question regarding the 2004 tax filings. How much was reported wages for Sophie Dental?
$12,465.
And how much was reported for the Adelson Institute for 2014?
$2,925.
Same idea if we go to line 15 of the corresponding year's tax return, namely 2014, we would see the total reported wages of $15,390.
That's correct.
Finally, for 2015, how much was reported as wages for Broward Dermatology or Dr. Obed?
$6,252.
And how much was reported from the Adelson Institute?
$12,150.
And again, line 15 on the 2015 tax return would be the total wages for 2015 of $18,402.
That's correct.
Next, I'm going to show you State's Demonstrative Exhibit 189. Can you describe what is different about this particular demonstrative from the last one that we reviewed?
Objection calls for narrative.
On this analysis, I simply added in the cash deposits that would bring her income to a more accurate level.
And these are cash deposits that we do not see reflected in State's Exhibit 190, 186, or 188, the income tax filings?
That's correct.
So where are you getting this cash deposit number from?
It's from my original analysis that showed all the cash deposits.
And was that from the CD that we entered into evidence, maybe it was last week or a couple days ago?
It is.
What were the amount of total cash deposits by Ms. McBanwell in 2013?
$2,800.
What were the total cash deposits in 2014?
Objection asked and answered.
Overruled.
$46,820.
And finally, total cash deposits for 2015?
$26,480.
In 2014, what is the difference between the total income reported and the total cash deposits?
Somewhere around 46,000.
Say what?
Approximately 46,000. Did I answer that?
No. I asked you the difference between the cash deposited and the amount of income that Ms. McBanwell reported to the IRS in 2014.
31,000. Approximately.
Did Ms. McBanwell receive a check from the IRS, like a tax return that we all look forward to?
We've gone far enough with this. Anything further?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
I'll move on to my next question. Did you review Sigfredo Garcia's, I know we discussed a little about his bank records last time.
Yes,
Did you have income tax filings for Mr. Garcia as well?
I did.
In 2013 and 2014, was there any reported income for Mr. Garcia?
There was not, even though he did file a tax form.
Okay. And then for 2015 or 2016, was there any income reported for Mr. Garcia?
2015 was $25,524. There was nothing for 2016. I saw no filing.
Would that be, I'll strike that question. And did you have any bank records from the earlier period, 2013, 2014?
I did not.
I have 1 moment, Judge. Thank you, Ms. Hall. I have no further questions.
Cross.
Ms. Hall, when you're discussing the fact that there's no bank records for my client from 2000, you said it was 13 to 14?
Yes.
He wasn't hiding those records from you, was he?
No, the account was closed. They were not able to be retrieved.
Okay, so if anybody closes an account, you can't retrieve the documentation?
It's much more difficult because the bank puts the records into archive.
That's not what I asked you. What I asked you was, could you do it?
Possibly.
Right. Did you do it in this case? Do you have those records?
No, I do not.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Government just asked you questions about cash deposit amounts for 2013, 14, 15. Just to make sure we have this clear, you don't have half of the year for 2013, right?
That's correct.
You don't have some of the year for 2015.
That's correct.
Let's talk about the Adelson Institute. The
It's-
government asked you questions about the incentive for the incentive for business to pay something. Remember that?
Yes.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that when a business, or let's back this up even more. When we receive paychecks, there's always something taken out, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, right?
Yes.
Now, it's not just the employee that has to pay those taxes. The business pays the same amount as well, too, right?
Yes.
Those are called FICA taxes.
Yes.
If you could explain to the jury what FICA taxes are.
Federal income tax. It's
So, if they want to pay somebody, they have to pay a tax on it. It's equivalent to what we see on our end as employers, the percentage that's taken out, right?
it's still a reduction in their expenses.
That's not my question, though. What I'm saying is that if a company wants to pay an employee, they got to pay about 15% of that money to the government, right?
Correct.
The other 15% is paid by the employees, right?
Yes.
Now, on your previous examination, you testified about how you, through your investigation, learned that the Adelsons had all this cash, right?
Yes.
Why go through all of this? Setting up employment, W-2s, taxes, instead of just paying a lump sum of cash.
I cannot answer that.
Let's go to the taxes now. Ms. Magbanwa did not report her tips. You'd agree with me on that, right?
Yes.
That doesn't mean she wasn't working, and you were asked a question about a bar, but it's a nightclub, nightclubs, plural. That doesn't mean that she wasn't working at nightclubs, right?
I have no record of her having employment at a club.
And again, the government is the one that's giving you the information to review, the state attorney's office.
To answer your question fully, most people that receive tips also receive a small dollar an hour wage, and that's reported.
In your work, you've never investigated somebody that worked at Club Fate, have you?
Not that particular one, no.
So you wouldn't know the normal practice of Club Fate, right?
I know the normal practices of businesses,
But of a nightclub in Miami called Club Fate, you don't know, right?
not specifically.
At best, you can say that tips weren't claimed. You here, with what you have, can't say, no, she was not working there, right?
Correct.
One brief second, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Redirect.
You did review checks from Club Fate in this case, right?
There were 2 checks written in 2015, but both of the checks bounced.
My point was you would agree they were checks, not cash,
Correct.
for tips.
Correct.
I have no further questions, Judge.
All right. Did you have a question of this witness? All right. All right, you can step down. We need to keep it further.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. You remain under subpoena. Call your next witness.
Judge, at this time, the state rests.
Okay. I need to let the jury step out. Anybody be seated? Garcia wishes to be heard on the judgment of acquittal motion.
Judge, at this time, Mr. Garcia asks for judgment on acquittal as to all 3 counts: murder in the first degree, solicitation of murder, conspiracy to commit murder. We believe that no reasonable juror could come back with a finding of guilt based on the fact that all the evidence that pertains to these specific charges, the solicitation, the conspiracy, and the first degree murder charge, are elicited by Luis Rivera, which is undoubtedly one of the least credible witnesses that I've seen testify in any proceeding. He has inconsistent variations of story after story. There is documentation showing that he is the person that rents the Prius. He is the person whose firearm is used in the murder. Yet he is the only person that alleges that my client was involved in this. Now, I know the government has a circumstantial case, but there's nothing to show a jury that my client wasn't simply a uninvolved, an innocent conspirator or an innocent third party in a conspiracy. Simply being merely being present at the place of a crime that in some way acts in furtherance of that crime doesn't make you a potential conspirator. The only evidence that the government has that solidifies their position is through Mr. Rivera, and we believe that based on his substantial amount of inconsistencies, as well as his, I would say, refusal to answer our questions with regards to his gang affiliation, and our questions with regards to the Latin King organization, that no reasonable juror could come back with a finding of guilt.
Then I have a motion for judgment of acquittal. McBanwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, on behalf of Ms. McBanwell, at this time, since the state has rested, we would renew all previous motions and objections, and at this time make our first motion for judgment of acquittal as to all 3 counts in the case. The court is aware that the standard at this point is the court is to take the evidence in light most favorable to the state, and it is our position that even at this point, they have failed to establish a prima facie case of guilt against Ms. McBanwell. This is a purely circumstantial case. According to Earhart, direct evidence is evidence which requires only the inference that what the witness said is true to prove a material fact. Circumstantial evidence is evidence which involves an additional inference to prove the material fact. It is our position that this is a completely circumstantial case because Mr. Rivera's testimony requires inference upon inference in order to establish certain elements of the crime. For example, one of the elements in the first count, which is they are charging her as a principal to first-degree murder. The state has to prove that Ms. McBanwell knew that a murder was going to be committed and that she did something to assist. The only testimony that they have at this point is from Mr. Rivera, who was impeached not only by direct evidence and records, but also by his own statements. And he essentially is stating that he also testified, Your Honor, that he had no communication with Ms. McBanwell before and that all of his information was coming through Mr. Garcia. So at this point, they don't have any evidence, number one, that she knew that there was a murder was going to be committed or that she did anything to assist in that event. And as the court is very well aware, circumstantial standard, when the evidence a criminally accused person is circumstantial, a motion for judgment of acquittal should be granted if the state fails to present evidence from which the jury can exclude every reasonable hypothesis except that of guilt. When circumstantial evidence is relied upon for a conviction, circumstances when taken together must lead to a reasonable and moral certainty that the accused and no one else committed the offense. And then in relation to that, Your Honor, as to the conspiracy count, the conspiracy exists when there is an express or implied agreement between two parties. The only direct evidence that the state gave in that respect was that there is phone communication between people who they don't have enough probable cause to arrest and my client. We have also presented evidence of a reasonable explanation that is not one of guilt, which is that she was communicating with her boyfriend as well as Mr. Garcia. They admit that they do not have the contents of those conversations, and not even Mr. Rivera, who claims that he found out that it was a murder on the drive up. So there is no evidence, direct evidence or otherwise, of any agreement between anyone for her to commit murder in order to establish the conspiracy element of the murder. Then we also, the same argument I would say too as to the solicitation, Your Honor, because solicitation then has the commanding, hiring, requesting, or encouraging another person to commit the crime. Mr. Rivera testified that he had never spoken to her, and everything that he said came across more so as a guessing game from Mr. Rivera. You know, she's behind the whole thing. These were all statements that are conclusory statements that weren't based on any direct evidence. And the case that I would have had the court turn its attention to that we are relying on in terms of how the court is to handle this type of evidence, we're relying on Rocker v. States. It's a case that I relied on in the Arthur hearing. It's 122 Southern 3rd 898, and that's ROCKER, and that's from the 2nd DCA from 2013. Thank you, Judge.
Your Honor, if we can add one thing.
Okay.
Your Honor, and also to bring to the court's attention, I'm looking at a copy of Ms. McVano's charging document, and they did not charge her as a principal. There's been no evidence in this case whatsoever that Ms. McVano was even in Tallahassee when Mr. Markell was killed, and the state has presented no evidence that she was the one that killed him, and that's what, they haven't charged her as a principal, Your Honor, so they have no evidence of that.
The law is pretty clear that that's not required. I would make the same ruling as to all previous motions and deny the motion for judgment of acquittal. Have you all discussed order of presentation of witnesses? We've been proceeding Garcia, McVano. Do y'all wish to do anything different at this point in time?
No, Your Honor.
Right. So you're prepared to call your first witness?
Just give me a second, that Mr. Padilla is taking a deposition with one of our potential witnesses in the penalty phase. And so if you give me a minute, I'll go.
Who is your first witness going to be?
It's going to be, he's now, it used to be Trooper Downing, now it's Sergeant Downing from Fort Highway Patrol.
And we need to, at the point, if you're still planning to call your gang expert, we need to discuss that before you call him.
I'm not going to call Rich.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you're ready with testimony? Y'all need 10 minutes. Give you enough.
Yeah.
10 minutes?
15 minutes, sir.
What's that?
15 minutes, please.
Yes, sir, and I believe the second witness the defense intends to call is Mr. Sawicki.
Yes.
And we've agreed that Sergeant Corbett could be present during his testimony.
Oh, absolutely. We have no objection to that.
Okay. 15 minutes then, 2:45.
Thank you.
Let the jury know it'll be 15 minutes.